Underground Railroad in Ripley, Ohio, a turning point in the lives of thousands of slaves, by Maya Farhat. What was that noise? John Rankin, where are you? Oh, he must have opened the heavy door to the basement. No doubt another group of fugitive slaves need shelter for the night. I'd better go see what I could do to help my preacher husband. Before the Civil War broke out in 1861, most African Americans in the South were enslaved with little chance of freedom. Those who gathered the courage to run away were often caught, punished severely, or even killed. But in the North, especially in the states just north of the Ohio River, another group of courageous individuals risked their lives, properties, and reputations to assist the runaways. These men and women provided a vital turning point for the desperate slaves seeking freedom. Known as the Underground Railroad, this loose network of people inflamed the already strained tensions between free and slaveholding states. Though many factors incited the South to fight, among them the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the raid at Harper's Ferry, there is no doubt that the Underground Railroad played a significant role. But let's look at an example of how a river, a town, and two men worked together to produce this turning point in the lives of over 2,000 slaves. The location of Ohio and the Ohio River gave the state a unique pivotal role in the Underground Railroad, offering the promise of freedom. The river provided a physical boundary between South and North, slavery and freedom. Although escaping slaves had to travel all the way to Canada after the Compromise of 1850, which required Northerners to return runaway slaves, crossing the Ohio River was an important turning point, both geographically and psychologically. Conductors on the Underground Railroad were scattered along the Ohio River, but the town of Ripley, Ohio played a crucial role in the struggle. The work of abolitionists John Parker and John Rankin in Ripley provided a life-changing turning point for each of the more than 2,000 slaves they helped, turning them from the shackles of slavery to a new life of freedom. Here's John Rankin now. I disliked slavery my entire life. I grew up in the slave states of Tennessee and Kentucky, and I saw firsthand the terrible effects of slavery upon both slave and master. Slavery is a living sin oozing through the deep valleys of Tennessee. At a young age, I was called to the ministry, graduating from Washington College and receiving my license to preach in 1817. As an abolitionist, I couldn't find a pulpit in the South. That was a turning point in my life because I was forced to move to a northern state to carry out my ministry. I settled in Ripley, Ohio, just yards from the Ohio River in 1822. The shameful sin of slavery began when the first Dutch ship docked in Jamestown in 1619, bringing African slaves. Then, after the Revolutionary War, the Founding Fathers found the issue so divisive they compromised over slavery when writing the Constitution. I believed this compromise was wrong. God had created everyone equal, including blacks. By 1835, my home in Ripley became one of the busiest stations on the Underground Railroad. As a signal for the fugitives, I kept my light on and door unlocked. When Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Law in 1850, my work became extremely dangerous. That law required the return of any slave seen in the North. I wasn't going to do that. Often, I found slave owners from the South, or even my fellow Ripley citizens surrounding my house with rifles drawn, demanding the return of a slave. Slave owners plotted to kill me because of my work. You fools. You'd better believe we did. John Rankin and his traitorous friend, John Parker, deserve to die. These men helped my escaping slaves hide in violation of the Fugitive Slave Law. Runaways magically disappear once they see that candle shining in Rankin's window. He and all those other abolitionists believe every word they read from that deceitful book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a Northerner who didn't understand the first thing about slavery. Our Southern economy would collapse without the work of our slaves. So yes, when the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 1864 opened the territory for settlement, of course we Southerners rushed in to vote for slavery to be extended there. Slaves are property, and even the Dred Scott decision of 1857 declared all blacks slaves, as well as free, were not and could never become citizens of the United States. You know, my faithful congregation, no more than 1/3 of families in the South own slaves, yet slavery is the law of the land throughout the South. It's 1860 and 4 million slaves live in the South. Why won't this tragedy end? They are considered property, whipped and beaten even when they haven't done anything wrong. They aren't even allowed to marry, own property, learn to read and write, or testify in court. Families are split up. My good friend, former slave John Parker, tells me that the worst part about slavery was being taken away from other human beings. He testifies slavery's curse was not the pain of the body, but the pain of the soul. I've seen the raging tide of oppression, red with the blood of the bodies and souls of men, sweeping over more than 2 millions of immortal beings. Now, wasn't that a wonderful sermon? Well, let me tell you, my John has always respected all of his helpers, but former slave John Parker is at the top of his list. I'll never forget this particular story. Parker snuck into the Shrove farm just across the Ohio River to help free a slave family. Shrove cruelly kept their baby in his room at night, tightly wrapping his arms around it, knowing his slaves wouldn't leave without their child. Parker tiptoed through the house until they found Shrove's room. He gently slipped the baby out of Shrove's arms. Parker crept downstairs to the escapees. As they dashed to the river where Parker's boat waited, boom! Shrove had woken up and was firing his rifle at them. The fugitives and Parker ran toward the Ohio and rowed across, gunshots flying around them. Luckily, no one got hurt. They made it to the Ripley shore, and the slaves were taken to the next station on the Underground Railroad. Parker must have been terrified during that escape. For sure, he turned the lives of that family from servitude to freedom. Another time, a nearly frozen woman arrived at our door in Ripley late one night. Oh, how my heart ached for her and her child. Her story is considered the bravest escape made by a slave on the Underground Railroad. Many believe that Eliza, a character in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, was inspired by her. She told us she carried her baby across the thawing ice of the Ohio River, breaking through every couple of steps. I helped her out of her sopping clothes and wrapped her and her baby in blankets as they sat by our blazing fire. The next night, my sons took them to the next station on the Underground Railroad. We Ripley abolitionists can't help every slave, but we sure have been a turning point in the lives of many, like these two, giving them a chance at freedom. The work of both John Parker and John Rankin brought about important turning points in the lives of thousands of slaves who, according to John Rankin, were trapped into one of the blackest sins that ever stained human character. When fugitives crossed the Ohio River and into Ripley, they experienced a crucial turning point both geographically and psychologically. The slaves were given the confidence they could make it to freedom safely. Although Parker and Rankin's work was often done in secret, as was the work of other conductors on the Underground Railroad, the result of their courage and self-sacrifice was freedom for untold numbers of men, women, and children who traveled the Underground Railroad.